So yesterday we talked about the properties of operations, and we left out one of the properties, and that was the distributive property. So today we're going to focus only on the distributive property. In fact, we're going to focus on the distributive property for 2 days in a row, because the distributive property is one of those properties that's going to have a lot of utility in what we do in mathematics and in algebra and moving forward. So today we're going to start part 1 of the distributive property, and we're going to mainly focus on how to use the distributive property to evaluate numerical expressions. Tomorrow is when we're going to look at the more algebraic problems containing the distributive property, but today we're looking at purely numeric, meaning there's no variables today. Alright, so what is the distributive property? The distributive property states that to multiply a sum or difference by a number, you multiply each term inside the parentheses by the number outside the parentheses. Or in other words, if you have a number multiplied by a quantity, so for example here I have A is being multiplied by the quantity B plus C. Alright, so since I have that quantity being multiplied by a number, that means that I'm going to multiply each one of the terms in the parentheses by A. So I'm going to take A and multiply it by B, I'm going to take it and multiply it by C. Thus the basis of the distributive property, telling me that that is equal to AB plus AC. The same is true if I'm multiplying by a difference, so I'm multiplying A by the difference of B and C. Again, I'm going to multiply A by B, and then I'm going to multiply A by C, and I'm going to subtract the two. Okay? This works for numbers as such. If I'm multiplying 4 times the quantity 6 plus 2, I'm going to multiply 4 by 6 and 4 by 2, giving me 4 times 6. I keep that sign, plus 4 times 2. Again, if I'm doing 3 times the quantity 7 minus 5, I'm going to multiply 3 times 7 and 3 times 5, keep that sign, so I get 3 times 7 minus 3 times 5. Okay? So you might be asking, why is the distributive property useful? Well, it's useful for breaking numbers up and multiplying. So if I asked you to multiply 9 times 14 mentally, chances are you might start to want to reach for the calculator, but using the distributive property can make this a little bit easier. I know that 14 can be broken down into the sum of 10 and 4. And I know that very easily I can calculate 9 times 10 and 9 times 4. So using the distributive property, I know that this is going to be equal to 9 times 10. Again, I'm going to keep that sign, plus 9 times 4. So then I'm going to have 90 plus 36, which I can very easily add in my head to get 126. Alright, whereas 9 times 14, I'd be multiplying 9 times 4, carry the 3, and then so on and so forth. It would become much longer than it needs to be. Now this is the distributive property of addition here that I used. You can also use the distributive property of subtraction. Now I look at 19 and I say, okay, very easily, 19 is the difference of 20 and 1. So this becomes 8 times the quantity 20 minus 1. Well, again, I see that I could use the distributive property because I'm multiplying a number by a difference. So I know that this is going to be 8 times 20. Again, I keep that sign, minus 8 times 1. Or in other words, 160 minus 8, or 152. Okay, so let's put the distributive property into practice. Use the distributive property to evaluate 8 times the quantity negative 9 plus 4. Now I do see a negative there, however, it is a sum. So I'm multiplying a number by a sum. And the reason it's a sum is because of that plus sign right there. So I know that the distributive property tells me that I'm going to do 8 times my first number plus 8 times my second number. 8 times negative 9, I have to remember my sign rules. A positive times a negative is a negative. So that's negative 72 plus 32. And remember, when I add different sign numbers, I subtract and I take the sign of the larger absolute value. So 72 minus 32 is 40, but since the 72 has a larger absolute value. The negative 72 has a larger absolute value. My final answer is negative 40. Okay, let's try another one. 7 times the quantity 3 plus 12. At this point, if you're feeling confident enough, pause the video, try it before me. Alright, so let's get solving. Again, I see that this is a sum, so I have a number multiplied by a sum, so it's going to be 7 times 3 plus 7 times 12. I know 7 times 3 is 21. I know that 7 times 12 is 84. 21 plus 84, and that's going to be 105. And I have my answer. Alright, a couple more examples. Alright, so here we have negative 9 plus 11 times 5. So the only difference here is the 5 is on the opposite side of where we're accustomed to seeing it. But we know from yesterday's lesson that we could use the commutative property to say that this is the same thing as 5 times the quantity negative 9 plus 11. Now it looks like our typical distributive property problems, correct? Now I could distribute this way because multiplication is commutative, but if it's more comfortable for you to look at the problem with the 5 preceding the parentheses, that's fine. So in this case, I know that I'm doing 5 times negative 9, 5 times 11, and I'm going to be adding those products. So this is negative 5. Oops, sorry. Excuse that negative. I know that this is 5 times negative 9 plus 5 times 11. So I have negative 45 plus 55. Again, I have a negative and a positive, so I subtract and take the sign of the larger absolute value. Final answer is 10. Okay, I'm going to draw a line here so I don't confuse the two problems. Again, I have the number coming after the parentheses, so I'm just going to use the commutative property and switch those two. So I'm going to have 7 times the quantity negative 5 minus 8. Now I have a difference on my hand. No problem. I'm going to distribute and keep that same sign. So in this case, I'll have 7 times negative 5 minus 7 times 8. I know that 7 times negative 5 is negative 35. I forgot to throw in my equal sign. So I have negative 35 plus 56. So I know that since, again, I have different signs and I'm adding, I subtract and I take the sign of the larger absolute value. So my final answer here is going to be positive 21. Okay? Let's keep moving. Here is your problem of the day. Again, over here is going to be that one where you might want to commute. And then there's going to be a trick with the signs in this one. Alright, so we may spend some more time talking about this problem whenever we come to class tomorrow, but be careful with your sign rules because you're going to be distributing a negative to a positive, but then you're also going to be subtracting, so don't lose that. Alright, so I'll see you in class tomorrow. Have a good night.